Good evening, everyone. It is a pleasure to welcome you to another talk organized by the Persian Manuscript Association in collaboration with Nomad's Manuscripts Landscape. Our speaker this evening is Dr. Aslisho Qurboniev. Before I hand over to my colleague, Dr. Bruno Di Nicola, I would like to just say a few words about this speaker. Aslisho and I were at the University of Cambridge together, and we studied at the same faculty. And I owe him a personal debt of gratitude because when I was planning to go to Afghanistan in 2017, he put me, and it was really impossible at that day, it was just bombing all the time. He put me in touch with the right person who facilitated my trip. And it turned out to be one of the most rewarding research trips that I ever had. So it is a real pleasure to welcome him today. I'll hand over to Bruno, who will introduce our speaker properly today. Thank you, Bruno.
Thank you, Shiva. Before moving to the speaker, also remind you that our speaker will speak for like 45 to 50 minutes, more or less. We give him freedom to speak, and then we will have some time for Q&A afterwards. We are recording this, but we are not going to be, so we will put it in YouTube, eventually edited, but we're not going to be recording the Q&A. So in the Q&A, feel free to speak and ask any questions you want. So don't worry about that. So making that clarification, Aslisho is a research associate at the Institute for Ismāʿīlī Studies in London. He studied philology, history, Islamic and Middle Eastern studies there, gaining his PhD at the University of Cambridge in 2020 with a thesis on the early Fatimid history in North Africa. Then after finishing his doctoral studies, he joined the Kitab project that you might know, the NERC funded project based at the Aga Khan University in London, where he was a postdoctoral fellow until 2024. And then he contributed there to the Open ITI corpus that many of you might know, and also contributed to the book, The Making of the Arabic Book, Volume 2, specifically Readily Practices Memory and Communities, which is being published or has been published very recently by Edinburgh University Press 2026. Maybe I'll show by corroborate that because I'm not sure if it's already published or it's about to be, but 2026. And one of the current projects is exploring the survival and transmission of books following the fall of the Fatimids on the one hand, and the Nisari Ismaili state of Alamut on the other. The talk today is specifically on one particular work and one particular manuscript, and for that reason it's entitled, a very interesting manuscript and with a very interesting transmission also of the text. So I'm looking forward to hear what Aslisho has to say. The title of the talk is Manuscript Punjab 1557, the first revision of Ṭūsī's Akhlāq-i Nāṣirī. Aslisho, floor is all yours. Take your time and tell us what you have to say.
Thank you very much. I am trying to share my screen right now. And okay, this is a presentation that should,
looks good.
Looks okay, thank you. First of all, thank you so much, Shiva and Bruno, for this generous introduction, and Shiva for very kind words. I can't remember that time that they put in touch with people in Afghanistan, but now it's coming back to me. And also, Bruno, thank you for inviting me, both of you. And good afternoon to everyone. I also thank you for making the time and joining us today for this presentation, and which is obviously about one particular manuscript of Akhlāq-i Nāṣirī, which is probably the most famous work of Naṣīr ad-Dīn al-Ṭūsī. And probably all of you are familiar with this text, and Naṣīr ad-Dīn al-Ṭūsī is probably doesn't need introduction. This work of Ṭūsī, which is on ethics and practical ethics, and his translation of Abu Ali Miskawayhi's Tahdhīb al-Akhlāq into Persian, which was written for his Ismāʿīlī patron Naṣīr ad-Dīn, Muhtasham of Quhistān, or governor of this province of northeastern Iran, and in whose name it's called Akhlāq-i Nāṣirī. And there are hundreds of copies, about 200 probably in Iranian libraries alone, of Akhlāq-i Nāṣirī. So it was extremely popular work, and also in many libraries around the world, and some of them, those manuscripts are older than this copy that is the subject of my talk. However, this one is the Punjab University Library manuscript, which is in the Shirani collection of Persian manuscripts. It's a unique version, and it goes back to, probably goes back to the earliest revision of the text. And as is known, and this is very well known, Ṭūsī has revised his Akhlāq-i Nāṣirī and his several other works after the fall of Alamut and when he joined Hulagu. So in this context, he revised also Akhlāq-i Nāṣirī and changed its preface or preamble, and which contained dedications to his Ismāʿīlī patrons Naṣīr al-Dīn, as well as the Ismāʿīlī Imam al-Dīn Muhammad bin Hassan. And then he joined the service of the Mongols, went with the conqueror of Iran and Iraq, the Mongol Hulagu. And then later on, he removed these references from the Akhlāq-i Nāṣirī as well as from his other works, as he tried to kind of denounce his association with the Ismāʿīlīs. So I'm not actually, or not really, a manuscript scholar like Bruno and Shiva, but I am mostly interested in how this manuscript tells us about Ṭūsī and his association with Ismāʿīlīs, and also his intellectual network and circle. So I think this is a very important witness to the time. So as I said, Ṭūsī doesn't really need an introduction for anyone who is joined this talk, but still some details of his life is probably relevant to give context for this presentation. He was born in Tus in a Twelvashi family, and then studied in Khorasan and Iraq. Then later, after he already was known as a very established scholar and gained fame, he joined the service of the Ismāʿīlī ruler of Quhistān, Naṣir al-Dīn Abdurrahim bin Abi Mansur, at about around 1233 or slightly earlier. The dates are not very certain, and that's how he joined his court in Quhistān, northeastern Iran, as you can see on the map, and that's where he wrote Akhlāq-i Nāṣirī and several other works for this patron. Later on, about maybe 10 years later, he moves to Alamut. Again, the dates are not very certain, but Alamut is the capital, the center of the Nizari Ismāʿīlī state in northwestern Iran. And the Ismāʿīlīs are, as some of you may not know, someone listening to talk maybe later, there's a group of branch of Shia Muslims, and the Nizari state is an offshoot of the Fatimid state, Fatimid Empire, based in Egypt. So after a succession dispute, the Nizari state was established in Iran by Hassan Sabo, who is also quite famous. After the Mongols' conquest of Alamut, Naṣīr ad-Dīn Ṭūsī joined Hulagu, and even though he was supposed to be sent to China to join the court of the great Mongol Khan Mongke, it didn't happen because the great Khan died, and Ṭūsī was then went to Maraga to establish an observatory for Hulagu. And that story is also well known, and later on he returns to Baghdad and then dies after serving two Mongol Ilkhanid Khans, the newly established dynasty. He dies in Baghdad. Now, the Mongol conquest of Alamut happened during the third attack of West Asia. It was relatively peaceful. The Ismāʿīlī governor of Quhistān, Ṭūsī's patron, surrendered very quickly, as well as did after the siege, Ruknuddin Khurshid, the Ismāʿīlī Imam, also surrendered to the Mongols. The Alamut castle was plundered by the Mongols, and some other fortresses also fell in the course of the year. although some of these, such as Girdku, was the last Ismāʿīlī castle to fall, they lasted longer, and this is relevant because during Ṭūsī's lifetime, these castles would be still active, so the Ismāʿīlīs would be relevant despite what the chronicles might tell us about the annihilation of the community. Both of the patrons of Ṭūsī are also they both died during this year. 1 year after the fall of Alamut, one of them, Ruknuddin Khurshud, dies on his way to the Great Khan, and Nasruddin dies in Quhistān. And Ṭūsī, of course, joins Hulagu and goes with him. But during this 24 years, about 20-something years of association with the Ismāʿīlīs, Ṭūsī writes most of his scientific work and works on philosophy, theology, and other subjects. So the majority of his work, including Akhlāq-i Nāṣirī, is written for his Ismāʿīlī patrons. And some of them, which you can see in blue, are written on Ismāʿīlī doctrines. But some other, such as Solai Mu'iniyah or Akhlāq-i Nāṣirī, these are on other subjects, so either scientific or ethics or theology or astronomy, and yet they include either details or references to Ismāʿīlī doctrines or dedications to the Ismāʿīlī Imam or his patrons, which later he viewed as problematic, and I'll go on to talk about why this was problematic in particular. There's the manuscript that you see on screen is one of the older copy of Akhlāq-i Nāṣirī, which is was copied in Nizamiya later on, and it was copied from Ṭūsī's autograph copy, which he had already revised in his lifetime. But this one is not the first revision of Ṭūsī's Akhlāq-i Nāṣirī. The first revision is the one we are talking about. This one was done later. Well, when the Mongols conquered the Ismāʿīlī castles, then in the historiography of the Ilkhans, the Ismāʿīlīs are the enemy and the heretics. And people like Juwayni, who wrote the history of this period, and then emphasized this, the destruction of the Ismāʿīlīs and their fall, to also, especially to paint it as some of the good things that the Mongols did to the Islamic world, so to speak, as a service to Islam, because these are really, really bad people. Now, Juwayni, Malik Juwayni, the author of Tarikh Jawan Kasho, as well as his brother, they were part of the same Ilkhanid elite who became the patrons of Naṣīr ad-Dīn at-Ṭūsī. Obviously, for them, the Ismāʿīlīs were, as you can tell from reading Tarikh Jawan Kasho, they were extremely dangerous enemies. And in this context, that we must see Ṭūsī's sudden change of attitude towards the Ismāʿīlīs and his insistence that he was held with the Ismāʿīlīs against his will, and was imprisoned there, only to be saved by Hulagu when he came and took down the castles, including the castle of Alamut. And then Juwayni goes on to describe, for instance, in detail and boasting about the destruction of the library of Alamut, for instance, and the burning of their heretical literature. So this is the most important context for Ṭūsī's project to erase any trace of his association with Ismāʿīlīs, and this is why he is revising his works, including Akhlāq-i Nāṣirī. Now, in this second part, now I'll go to have a look at the manuscript in some more detail, just to give an overview of the changes. Now, I'm not going to describe it in too much detail. Also, I'm not qualified to comment on the paleography and other material aspects of this manuscript. It looks very old to me. It is obviously preserved in the Punjab University Library. I'm grateful to them to present this copy to me to send it after some requests and some time. So written in a cursive Naskh script, which again to me was I'm not a paleographer. I can't really judge, but I think it's some precursor of the Nastaliq script, which later developed in the 14th century in Iran. Like, this is already cursive, and yet it's not Nastaliq. So this, as we will see from the copyist's handwriting in Arabic and Persian, this was clearly used for writing in Persian, whereas Arabic is written in regular Naskh script. It has a color form which includes the date of the writing of this copy, which is 1264, 666, and 12. There's a mistake here, 1264. And the copyist is Buzurgmir bin Muhammad bin Habashi at Ṭūsī, about whom I will talk in more detail. What you can read here is the revised preface of the work. The original one included these dedications to the Ismāʿīlī governor of Quhistān and the Ismāʿīlī Imam of Alamut. So the first one, he says, he praises him as Lord of the Lords, Master of the Age, the Interpreter of the Divine, the Most High of the religion and of the world and the religion, al-Dīn. This is about the Imam. The shadow of God in the two worlds, Muhammad bin al-Hasan, glorified be his mentioning and sanctified be his command. The dhikr is tasbih wa lihamri tasdiq. It's a very Ismāʿīlī formulation, which is usually reserved for the Imam. And then he says, in similar terms, he praises the governor, Naṣīr ad-Dīn, the greatest king, the exalted Padishah, the supporter of truth, God, Haqq, and religion, Deen, the refuge of Islam and all Muslims, king of the kings of both Arabs and Persians, and most just amongst the commanders of the sword and the pen, the emperor of the world, and the sovereign of Iran. These are the words that he later on would use for the Jobani brothers. So Divan, like words such as Padishah Arab, Ajam, Padishah Jahan. These are commonly also used for his other patrons. Although the honorifics that he uses for the Ismāʿīlī Imam, especially the prayer, is unique. I don't have the copy of the manuscript. There are also from later manuscript that have these. I don't have those, but we know, and it has been studied by Jalaluddin Humayi and published. So there's no need to really go into too many details about this. But what we have here in this manuscript is again the new preamble that he adds to the text. So I will just show you where here. If you can see my mouse on the screen, it begins off after prayers and salawat and in introduction he begins by saying أما بعد محرر إن مقالات ومقالات ومؤلف إن رسالات مولانا سلطان الحكماء نصير الدين نصير الحق والدين برهان الإسلام والمسلمين علامة العالم أفضل المتأخرين ووارث الأنبياء والمرسلين محمد بن محمد الطوسي مد الله عمره, which indicates that he was still alive. It was written during his lifetime. Triningwe. So this is actually the honorifics that he uses in this particular way that Naṣīr ad-Dīn Ṭūsī is referred to is actually also unique to this manuscript. Another, it's very short. So I think probably because he was alive, and also probably because of the association and unique connection relations that was between the copyist and between Ṭūsī, that these words are used, Maulana and so on. And then it goes on to say to say these yeah. So it says there's محرر كتاب كموصوف بأخلاق ناصرة, and I've translated this bit here. كموصوف موسوم است بأخلاق ناصری در وقت اتفاق افتاد که با سبب تقلب روزگار جلوی وطن بر سبیل اضطرار اختیار کرده بود و دست تقدیر او را به مقام کوهستان پایبند گردانیده. And that's exactly what he then is part of the revision. He explains that the reason he had written the introduction, which follows this page, in which he says, praises Nasir-ad-Din, and then says, and then dedicates the book to him. He explains this here in this additional preface that he adds. He says, I was forced to leave my hometown and homeland and was trapped there in Quhistān, and was forced to, in various places. Then various other works, he also claims that he was almost imprisoned in Alamu, and also in Quhistān. He was forced to be there, and the manner in which Naṣir Ṭūsī writes his work is very apologetic, in both in the introduction and then in the end, in the colophon. He asks people, copies, who copy, if they see any mistake, then they should correct it. And according to the editors of Akhlāq-i Nāṣirī, which was edited by Mujtaba Minoui and Ali Reza Haidari, this exactly refers to the parts of the Akhlāq-i Nāṣirī, which contains those references to Ismāʿīlī doctrine or praises of Naṣir-ad-Din. So, and this copy contains all those references and phrases that he didn't manage to remove from the text. This was probably written at a time that he didn't have much time, and he wanted to just quickly add an introduction, debauche, to this manuscript, which had already been copied and popular among people. Now, just going to in addition to the introduction, this one, and this is also again very unique, this manuscript contains an epilogue, which is also about a praise of Naṣir-ad-Din, and in terms such as attributing extreme learned and scholarly status, and almost obviously in a very exaggerating manner praising him, and saying, for instance, that he, even though this follows the testament of Wasoyo Aflatun, the testament of Plato, in the end of Akhlāq-i Nāṣirī, which then he goes on to say that this is actually absolutely not necessary for my patron Naṣir Ṭūsī, because he is actually, this learnedness is in his essence, and he is much superior to everyone, as is also generous, and so on. So this is another part of the manuscript of the work that in later revision this is also removed. But there are a lot of other details, small details, which are just the praises of Naṣir-ad-Din, and there are too many to discuss here, but some of them just refers to him as generous patron, or the patron, my patron, or he commanded me to do so, and so these references were also removed from the text. And there are also references to which are specifically Ismāʿīlī in such as Ahl-Haq, referring to probably to Ismāʿīlīs, or Ta'yīd, and so on. So some words that were some Ismāʿīlī flavor were also removed from the text. Further, this manuscript also has some pages that have probably been missing, and later on they have been inserted, and you can see clearly that they're written in later Nastaliq. And there are some other sections which I don't have the pictures right here, but they they contain that one section of Akhlāq-i Nāṣirī, which was added later after the fall of Alamut and 3 years before the writing of this manuscript. That section is about the responsibilities towards the parents, حقوق پدران و مادران. And that section was written at the request of one of his friends who visited him, Naṣīr Ṭūsī, in Maragha, and said, why don't you write also about responsibility towards parents? This is important part of practical ethics. And then Ṭūsī says, okay, I'll write this section as well. This one originally didn't have it, and although this manuscript was written later, the additional section which comes at the end of the second maqala was written 3 years before in 663 Hijri, and this copy was made in 666, but because probably that the copyist didn't have access to it. However, someone else later came on and inserted those pages, about 3 folia, into the book, and they're written in a Naskhi hand, but different from Buzurjmir's handwriting. I've prepared a not very perfect diagram of the schematics of this revision. You can see there's an original version that we said was the original Ṭūsī's version that he wrote, the translation of Miskawayh's Tahdhib al-Akhlaq, and then later on after the fall of Alamut, he revised it, and I think it's on that the current manuscript is based on that first revision. It's not based on, it's not the original writing, obviously, not dictated by Ṭūsī. It also doesn't seem to be based on Ṭūsī's own copy. Otherwise, I think he would have mentioned it. He says rather that this was based on a defective copy. So you have it's based on a copy of a copy probably, but it is nevertheless probably the first revision of Naṣīr ad-Dīn at-Ṭūsī. But we have further revision, for instance, the one as I just mentioned in 662 to 1264 CE, that the edition of new preface. By this time he was in Maragha, and the oldest one that we have, one of the oldest manuscripts, that is I just showed, and from Afyon Kalaysar, that manuscript is also based on the one that he revised in Maragha, and that one includes the no, sorry, I made a mistake. The second one is the one that he revised because he wanted to remove the new preface and revised it, also removed the epilogue as well. But there's also the third revision which he did in Maragha, and then added the section towards responsibility towards parents, and that one is the one is now full complete with new preface, and removed the epilogue, and all the content has been revised when he had time. He removed all these details, and this is what the other copies, the most well-known copies, are based on this revision. It's not a perfect or exact diagram, but just to illustrate that this revision of the manuscript goes back to one that was earlier than the later revision. So that's the whole purpose of this revision. But now we turn on to some other details that we can get from the copy from this copy, and this is to do with the copyist, Buzurjmir bin Muhammad bin Habashi at-Ṭūsī, a person that is known to us from the colophon of this work, and he writes it in at the end, in the folio at the end of the manuscript, 211, I think 211. The whole manuscript is consists of 212 folio, I think. And then he writes here: تم الكتاب بحمد الله تعالى وحسن توفيقه والصلاة على سيدنا محمد وآله يوم الخميس 12 ربيع الأول سنة 66 و600. كاتبه بزرجمير محمد بن حبشي الطوسي, and there are also some of the, you can see that this was also later retraced with dark color, and then some other notes that I will refer to. So Buzurjmir bin Muhammad al-Tusi writes this colophon, which you can see here on the right hand side. Here. This is the first colophon, the main colophon, but he also writes another one in Persia on the other side, which here he writes that anyone who has seen, who can see this work. My screen is closed. Sorry. In Persian, he writes about the quality of the copy, that if anyone can read this copy and find any mistakes, shouldn't blame me, rather is because the original copy that I was based on was quite defective. So you can read it here. که نسخه اصل نیک سقیم بود، هرچند قوت جهد در تصحیح آن مبذول داشت، اما جایگاه چند نوفی نیامد. So it was a defective copy. But what's interesting also is that he has left some space to copy the preamble. It could be someone else, someone else who wrote this comment later, but initially I thought this was a comment by Buzurjmir bin Muhammad, by this copyist, who wrote that this نسخة الخطبة القديمة لهذا الكتاب التي أبطلها المحقق الطوسي. Cannot read the screen, it's very small, but it says here is the copy of the original preface that was cancelled by Ṭūsī, and then there comes a basmala in the calligraphic hand, and there's also 1.5 page space to copy, presumably to copy the preface, which is not copied then. And that is that's interesting. There's also another note on the right hand page, which just writes the date again in numbers next to the colophon on the right hand side, and then other notes. These are from the later period. I'll refer to them later. These load below the colophon and on the left hand side, if you can see on your screen. But this is also interesting because he writes both in Arabic and in Persian. The first colophon he just writes in Arabic. Presumably that's how he was used to writing, just generally repeating the formulas, but then he also writes additionally in Persian, and then some wassalam in the end, and then someone who probably is not him, Buzurjmir, but someone comes and wants to copy maybe the original preamble, but never does. And then this is, in the end, it's followed by, as you can see on the other page, it's followed by a letter by Abu Sa'id Abu Khair to Ibn Sina and his reply, Ibn Sina's reply, and then there are also some poetry by Ibn Sina or Rubai attributed to Ibn Sina. These are not relevant necessarily, but they're only relevant because this shows also the handwriting of Buzurjmir in Arabic. He changes his handwriting. When he writes in Persian, he writes in cursive, and when he goes and writes in Arabic, it looks like he is writing in a naskhi hand. Now, first of all, if you might think that this is not his handwriting or someone else might have written it, but I'll show you more evidence that this is probably Buzurjmir al-Ṭūsī's handwriting. Now, we have information about Ṭūsī, Buzurjmir bin Muhammad bin Habashi al-Ṭūsī, this copyist who wrote this manuscript. He was one of the people who was closely affiliated with Ṭūsī. Ibn al-Fuwati was another person who was also going in the same circles, write about him in his biographical dictionary, Majma' al-Adab. He writes that he was a jurist and a copyist. He was a scholarly copyist and had good handwriting and was making few mistakes. And he used to live in Maragha in the days of our felicitous Lord Abu Naṣīr ad-Din Abu Ja'far at-Ṭūsī. And then he returned to Baghdad, where he lived in the Nizamiya. And then I visited him here and wrote on his dictation in both Maragha and Baghdad. And he copied in his own hand a number of abridged and comprehensive works. Now, that shows that both of them were closely connected to Ṭūsī, and they copied Buzurjmir, or as his name says, as well as Nisba, or comes from somewhere from Tus, and also clearly Persianate and Persian-speaking men. And this is not unusual because so many people are moving westwards and residing in Baghdad, and especially with the Ilkhani, a lot more people are moving towards the west. And is extremely interesting person, and otherwise it would have been unknown, but we have this information about him. So a lot of the copies we don't know much about. Luckily, we have Ibn al-Fawti's testimony here, and there's note in his biographical dictionary, and then we have more information because he has copied another important work. All of this is discussed in a paper that I wrote with my colleague Howard van den Bossche, who first asked me who is Buzurjmir, and when he was working on this very famous copy of Rasail Ikhwan al-Safa, which is Istanbul Asad Afandi 3638. This is one of the most beautiful and most famous copies of the Rasail Ikhwan al-Safa. Probably everyone has seen it and everyone knows it. And this was also copied by our Buzurjmir, obviously, but he writes his name is in Arabic, Buzurjmir. Now, this one obviously is also signed by him. And when we came across this colophon and tried to find out who Buzurjmir bin Muhammad at-Ṭūsī is, we were very surprised that nobody had actually taken any interest in the identity of this person, or despite the fact that the Ikhwan al-Safa have been studied for many years and this copy is very famous, but few people have, or literally no one actually has paid attention to Buzurjmir's role in the production of this manuscript. So he also signed this in the colophon. He writes, and the date, which is 20 years later than this copy, the copy of Akhlāq-i Nāṣirī. So there's 20 years difference in the year 686, or already after the death of Naṣīr ad-Din at-Ṭūsī. He copies this famous and beautiful copy of Rasail Ikhwan al-Safa. And he also, and this I think I should mention it at this point, like in the front of this, that it has this beautiful and famous frontispiece that apparently depicts the authors of the Rasail Ikhwan al-Safa. There's an article of this on this by a scholar of Islamic art out that was published at the same time. I can give the reference later, but this one is it repeats the well-known story of the authorship of the Rasail Ikhwan al-Safa, that this from Sawan al-Hikmah, and names the 5 persons who were allegedly the alleged authors of Ikhwan al-Safa from Basra. He names them explicitly on the preface, and that is, I think, very interesting because I think if taken into account Buzurjmir's work for Ṭūsī and involvement in distancing Ṭūsī from other Ismāʿīlī works, such as an affiliation with the Ismāʿīlīs of Alamut, it's known that the Rasail Ikhwan al-Safa was also by this time commonly attributed to the Ismāʿīlīs. But Buzurjmir, in copying this manuscript, he attributes it clearly to, I think it's very, I think to me, it looks obvious that he wanted to leave no doubt that this is a work that was written by these individuals who are known and they are not affiliated with Ismāʿīlīs. I think that is the purpose of this this frontispiece and information about the authors. And I think that the wider context of Buzurjmir's activities and affiliation with Ṭūsī, and also as the scholar of this piece that I was mentioned on the frontispiece as a patron statement, argues that this was dedicated to probably including to the Giovanni brothers. But in any case, he was obviously working in the same time, and this distancing from the Ismāʿīlīs, I think, an important aspect of his work. That's one I mentioned. So the colophon again is here. He is in Asad Effendi as well. There's two colophon. The Rasul Ikhwan Safa here as well. It signs both at the end of the manuscript as well as at the end of the section on magic. There are two ending to this manuscript, and he signs his name twice, Buzurjmir bin Muhammad at-Ṭūsī. So there's no doubt that this was Ṭūsī, this Ṭūsī, Buzurjmir bin Muhammad at-Ṭūsī, and that he is not someone else copying from his handwriting, but rather it looks like these are both writing his handwriting, although they do look quite different. I've looked at the letters and the way he traces them, and his handwriting, to me, it looks very similar. But being a professional copyist, he was able to change his handwriting between Persian and Arabic. And as we can see, the Arabic and the Rasail copy and the Arabic letter that he copies at the end of Akhlāq-i Nāṣirī, they look quite similar in the way he traces and writes the letter Yo and several other letters. It's very clearly his handwriting. Now, further information about Ṭūsī and his association with the Ismāʿīlīs after Alamut. I think the manuscript make it clear that he wanted to distance himself from his former Ismāʿīlī associates and patrons, but he actually visits again during the exact year that this manuscript was copied in Maragha. Ṭūsī visits Quhistān and Khurasan. He went in the company of his students, including the famous Qutb-ud-Din al-Shirazi, who goes with him to Quhistān, where he meets and comments about the death of one of his former associates, and he marries his son to one of the whom Ibn al-Fawati names her as Princess al-Quhistaniyya, or this princess that was presumably one of the Ismāʿīlī princes there. So he marries his son in Quhistān and comes back also accompanied by another Quhistani prince, which is named as Manuchihr ibn Iran Shah. And then he comes, he's also mentioned in Ibn al-Fawati's dictionary. So he is still affiliated with these people. He is not hasn't cut his ties completely, but he is forced to distance himself in this document. And again, as I mentioned, the context of this extremely political competition, and in which even his own patrons, the Giovanni brothers, are not safe from accusations of treason and so on. So he wasn't really risking that, I think. And this is interesting because the black ink shows his journey between Maragha, the line that you see on the screen, his journey back to Quhistān in the year 665, 67 Hijri, or 1267, 69, after which he comes back to Maragha, goes back to Baghdad and dies. So the manuscript, however, is also interesting because it has further notes that shows its journey from Iran to India. There's not much actually about the journey itself. We don't know how it ended up in Punjab or in India, but we have information about it being part of the royal collection of the Mughal Empire. There's the first note that we have is from the year 300 years after copying. So this is بعد 300 سنة من تاريخ كتابتي. I think it's 300 years after. It's sometimes probably 1500s, 1600s. This is not very clear, but this is one of the notes. We don't know where this was made. It is in Nastali. And then further on, we see that based on this note, it says this was moved to Burhanpur in India. So the note, the date that we have here says Salkh Zulhijjah 1035, which is 1626 in Burhanpur. Now, again, we don't have further information. This is very short note that we have, and then later notes from the flyleaf actually have dates and more concrete detail, which suggests that this was viewed by none other than Aurangzeb Olamgir on two occasions. One of them is one of the notes says بطريق هفتم الشهر ربيع الأول سنة 36 جلوس عرض دیده شد. And then the other note says بطريق سوم الشهر ربيع الأول سنة 37 Olamgiri, which is converts to 1105. I haven't checked these. These were the details that were established by including by the editors of Akhlāq-i Nāṣirī, but they seem to be correct and correspond to the reign of Olamgir as far as I checked. And there are some other notes. There's another note which is not mentioned by the editor or by anyone else who looked at the manuscript. It says بطريق 27 در حجة عرض دیده شد. There's another note which I cannot clearly read, but if someone can read, maybe you can tell me. There's another note of inspection, I think by the custodian or librarian. And now there's another note which is I am not able to read it. It says شهر رمضان المبارك سنة 31 جلوس Muhammad Shah. I could be completely mistaken. But this suggests that this was during the reign of Muhammad Shah, during the Mughal Emperor, during whose reign Nadir Shah raided India and looted the treasury, including Kohinoor and the Peacock Throne and so on. And this is again recorded on the flyleaf. You can see on the first folio, it's recorded that بطريق 20 جمادی الآخر سنه 4 جلوس عالمگیر ثانی, which is who is the second عالمگیر. این کتاب مستطاب از آن بنده بود و در هنگامه شاه دورانی به غارت رفته میان عبدالهادی, someone named میان عبدالهادی returned it. He bought it from the market and then returned it back to the royal library. So that is a very interesting journey of the manuscript, about which I haven't looked in detail compared with other notes of the same library, but it looks like it was returned to the library and on the February of 1758 by someone named Mian Abdul Hadi. But there's unfortunately no further detail about the how it ended up again in Punjab. Probably people who know can know what how these the royal treasury ended up in different places. And again, this is just general information about the manuscript, and it's not related to the actual substance of what I wanted to say. So I think the time is up, but I wanted to just conclude what as I had discussed. I think Akhlāq-i Nāṣirī and this particular copy is extremely relevant and interesting for for Ṭūsī's career, and especially the question of his affiliation with the Ismāʿīlīs, the question of his relationship with the Mongols and how he navigated the political circumstances of his time. It's also relevant to the wider intellectual networks that he created and facilitated. People who moved in these circles, like Bozorgmehr, who was extremely capable copyist and was a scholar, and the intellectual climate that actually people like Ṭūsī fostered in the early Ilkhanate period. Of course, it's well known to specialists that the destruction of the Mongols, of the Islamic libraries, and the destruction of places like Baghdad and Alamut has been extremely exaggerated in Muslim sources. And as we can see from this very first decade, these manuscripts and activities of people, the very first decade of the Ilkhanate rule, we have people like Ṭūsī and Bozorgmehr. They're extremely active in producing scientific and copying and writing materials on various topics. So it's the picture of destruction, and destruction that is often used to depict or also to explain sometimes to the fall of the Muslim world, the decline of the Islamic world, and because of the Mongol conquest, is actually this leads us to question these conclusions. So that is, I think, above all, this is a very interesting copy, and shows how Ṭūsī and Bozorgmehr navigated his this troubling time of the early Ilkhanate period. And for me personally, and anyone who's interested in the history of the Nizari state of Alamut and the intellectual output and the fate of the libraries in this period, the Ismāʿīlī libraries, I think it's very interesting material witness. Thank you very much again, anyone who joined the talk. So that's the end of my talk. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Bruno. Thank you, Aslisho. It was really amazing to listen to all these changes that they made to the manuscripts, and also about Bozorgmehr, who was a hero, improving his handwriting in 20 years massively. So it was great to have this discussion. Thank you, everyone who joined us. We will have the next PMA talk on 9th of July. Thank you.
Yeah,
Have a good evening.
thank you for anyone who joined, because I struggled to join because this time is I leave office and it's very difficult for me to join usually. But anyone who joined, I appreciate.
Thank you so much to give us your time. I know that it was not easy for you to accommodate this in your schedule. So Jamie also sends a thank you to you.
Thank you, Jamie.
Lovely talk about
everyone.
Such a vibrant period and players. Good to see you and others. And same for us, Jamie. Thank you. I hope everyone survives the heat, and have a good evening.
You too.
Bye.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Bye-bye.
everyone. Goodbye.
Till next time. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.